We all have that picture in our minds, don't we? The Nevada desert, maybe a fence, those warnings, and just this huge question mark hanging over Area 51.
Definitely. It's iconic.
But let's maybe set aside the little green men stuff for a minute, because the actual declassified history of the place, officially Homey Airport, or Groom Lake, it's packed with genuinely surprising things.
Absolutely. For decades, the secrecy just fueled these incredible stories.
Yeah.
But when you dig into the real historical records, the reports, the documents, you find this compelling, real-world story, pushing aviation limits, navigating the Cold War.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've gone through the official information, pulled out the key bits, the unexpected stuff, the really fascinating facts about Area 51. The goal is understanding the reality behind all the myths.
Sounds good.
So let's just get right to it. Why Groom Lake? Why that spot?
Okay, so it all starts back in 1955. The USAF, the Air Force, and the CIA, they had this really urgent need. They needed to secretly test the Lockheed U-2 spy plane.
And the usual places wouldn't cut it. Edwards, Palmdale.
No, just not secure enough. Not for something this sensitive.
Right. That's where Kelly Johnson comes in, the big Lockheed designer. The story goes he flew over Groom Lake, saw this dry lake bed.
And basically knew instantly. It was perfect. You can see why this huge flat surface, his famous words were, as smooth as a billiard table. It was like a ready-made runway.
Wow, just sitting there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the location itself, Emigrant Valley, mountains all around, already inside the Nevada test site boundary.
Yeah.
It offered this natural buffer, kept prying eyes away.
And pretty remote, too. About 100 miles from Vegas.
Yeah, isolated enough. So the CIA quickly got the Atomic Energy Commission to basically add the land parcel to the Nevada test site.
Yeah.
And on the maps, it was designated Area 51.
And just like that, boom, secret base.
Pretty much. They set up Paradise Ranch. That was Johnson's optimistic name to try and convince workers to move out there.
Paradise Ranch. A bit of a stretch, maybe.
Yeah, it quickly just became known as the ranch. The initial setup was really basic. Temporary shelters, workshops, trailers, that kind of thing.
But they still needed to get people and supplies in and out, right?
Oh, yeah, constantly. Regular flights from Burbank, California, right into this top-secret spot.
Okay, so the U-2 gets things started, but then came even more ambitious stuff like Oxcart, the A-12.
Exactly. And the A-12, this high-speed reconnaissance plane, well, the initial facilities just weren't enough anymore. It needed a much longer runway, higher speeds,
How long are we talking?
Well, initially they built an 8,500-foot runway, but even that wasn't quite enough, so they extended it pretty quickly to 10,000 feet.
10,000 feet. That's serious. And wasn't there that weird spiral thing, too? The hook?
Yes. Clever bit of engineering, really. They marked this huge Archimedean spiral on the dry lake bed itself. It was an overrun area, basically. If a pilot had to abort a landing at high speed, they had somewhere relatively safe to go.
Thinking ahead. Smart.
Definitely. And they even marked out 2 unpaved strips on the lake bed for crosswind situations. But beyond the runways, the whole infrastructure had to grow.
Right, you need hangars, control towers.
They brought in 3 surplus Navy hangars, built new ones like Hangar 7, got a control tower from another base, workshops, admin buildings, and housing. Lots of housing. Over 130 surplus Navy duplex units eventually.
It wasn't all work, though, was it? I read something about a movie theater.
Yeah, they tried to make it livable. Commissary, movie theater, even a baseball diamond, volleyball court, little reservoir pond for swimming.
And fuel. The A-12 needed special stuff, right? JP-7.
That's right. High flashpoint fuel for those extreme speeds. So they built a permanent fuel tank farm. Huge capacity.
Okay, so you've got these cutting-edge planes. Secrecy must have been paramount. How did they tighten things up?
Significantly, there was a local mine, the Groom Mine, operating in the basin. They closed it down.
Just shut it down.
Yep. And the FAA expanded the restricted airspace around the base. Eventually, it became this massive 600-square-mile box, the Groom Box. No civilian aircraft allowed, period.
And they had their own little air force to support things.
Kinda, yeah. F-101 Voodoos for training gave pilots a feel for high-speed flight. T-33 Shooting Stars for proficiency. C-130s for hauling cargo. Even a helicopter for search and rescue.
And a chase plane.
Lockheed provided an F-104 Starfighter for that. Following the test flights, keeping an eye on things, it really was like this self-contained, highly classified operation out there.
Incredible. So, manned flight was pushing boundaries, but then came the U-2 incident in 1960. Scary power shot down. That must have changed things.
Big time. It really highlighted the risks of sending pilots over hostile territory, even in something like the U-2. So that spurred serious talk about unmanned alternatives, drones.
Which led to the D-21 tagboard program.
Exactly. The D-21 was this incredibly fast, high-altitude drone. The initial idea was wild. Launch it from a modified A-12, which they designated the M21.
Launch a drone from a spy plane, midair.
That was the plan. Essentially blow off the drone's engine covers and drop it mid-flight.
Yeah.
But it ran into a lot of technical problems.
Like what?
Aerodynamic issues on the early captive flights when it was still attached. The first actual launch in '66, it flew, but ran out of fuel quickly.
Not ideal.
And then came the tragedy. A checkout flight, the drone collided with the M21 launch plane right after separation.
Oh, no.
Yeah. One of the M21 crew ejected, but sadly drowned. Just a terrible accident.
So that was the end of launching it from the M21.
Pretty much. Kelly Johnson, who apparently always had some doubts, canceled that part of the program, but they didn't scrap the drone itself. Instead, he proposed adapting the D-21s to launch from B-52 bombers.
So a total shift in launch platform. Did that work?
They kept testing out of Groom, yeah. The B-52 would carry the D-21 out over the Pacific for launch. But even with that change, the program faced big hurdles.
And technology was moving fast elsewhere, too, right?
Exactly. By this point, the A-12 was finally getting deployed, the even faster SR-71 Blackbird was coming online, and crucially, reconnaissance satellite technology was getting really good.
Satellites could do the job without risking planes or pilots over enemy territory.
Precisely. So the D-21 tagboard program was eventually canceled in 1971. It's a classic Cold War example. Even cutting-edge tech could become obsolete really fast. Area 51 wasn't just about the planes themselves. It was proving ground for how you did reconnaissance.
Okay, so U-2, A-12, drones. But Area 51 wasn't just about developing American tech, was it?
Yeah.
What about foreign planes?
Ah, yes. A totally different but equally secret line of work, evaluating captured Soviet aircraft. This is a huge priority during the Cold War.
Trying to figure out what the other side had.
Exactly. Understand their capabilities, figure out how to beat them. So starting in the late 60s, Groom Lake became the secret home for various MiGs.
MiGs at Area 51.
Yep. MiG-21's under a program called Have Donut, MiG-17's under Have Ferry and Have Drill.
So American pilots were actually flying Soviet jets there.
Flying them, testing them, even doing mock dogfights against U.S. fighters. To keep it secret from, regular pilots flying out of nearby Nellis Air Force Base, the airspace over Groom was sometimes marked red square on charts. Unofficially, of course.
Red Square. Wow. Did this actually make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. The insights gained from things like Have Doshnud were directly responsible for setting up the Navy's fighter weapons school. Top Gun.
No way. Really?
They realized pilot skill and tactics were just as crucial as the hardware. The lessons learned in those secret dogfights over Nevada directly improved how U.S. Navy pilots flew and fought.
That's incredible. It wasn't just planes either, was it? Something about radar.
Right. Program Have JLib. That focused on testing Soviet tracking and missile control radar systems. They even built a mock Soviet-style air defense complex nearby to make the tests realistic.
So they eventually moved this stuff.
Yeah, in '73, these different foreign tech evaluation projects got bundled under Project Have Idea and moved over to the Tonopah Test Range Airport. More space, better facilities for that kind of work. But Area 51 was where it all started. Crucial groundwork.
Okay, so MiGs, radar, then came the next big leap. Stealth. And Area 51 was ground zero again, right? With Have Blue.
Right at the forefront. Have Blue was the prototype program for what became the F-117 Nighthawk, the stealth fighter.
That weird-looking angled jet.
Exactly. The very first flight of a Have Blue prototype was at Groom Lake, December 1977. Totally unconventional shape, designed to just disappear from radar. It laid the foundation for stealth as we know it.
And the F-117 itself was developed and tested there, too.
Intensively. The Air Force set up a special unit, the 4450th Tactical Group, initially based right there at Area 51, to shepherd the F-117 into service.
How did they train pilots for something so different?
They actually used A-7D Corsair II as surrogate trainers initially, to get pilots used to some of the handling characteristics before they climbed into the real, highly classified thing.
And the test team had a nickname, Baja Scorpions.
That's the one. Apparently, they found a huge scorpion in their office one day and the name stuck. It speaks to the environment, right? Desert isolation. These guys rigorously tested everything, radar signature weapons, training the very first frontline F-117 pilots, all in total secrecy.
How did they even move the planes around without anyone seeing?
Under cover of darkness, literally. They use massive C-5 Galaxy cargo planes. They defuel the F-117s, partially disassemble them, carefully cradle them inside the C-5, and fly them in or out at night.
Sounds like a spy movie.
It really does. But eventually, Area 51, while great for initial testing, wasn't ideal as an operational base for a whole fleet of stealth fighters.
So they moved again, like the MiGs.
Similar situation. Tonopah Test Range Airport was chosen, big expansion project there. By the early 80s, F-117 operations mostly shifted to Tonopah, but Area 51 still played a role, testing refurbished F-117s later on.
Okay, so all this incredible revolutionary activity is happening, but the government barely said a word about the place for decades.
Remarkably tight-lipped. Its existence wasn't, like, totally denied, but the specifics, what actually went on there, top secret.
Which inevitably leads to problems, I imagine. Lawsuits.
It did. In 1994, a group of civilian contractors and widows of contractors sued. They claimed they'd been exposed to toxic chemicals burned in open pits at the site. Alleged serious health problems resulted.
That sounds serious. How did the government respond?
It put them in a tough spot.
Oh,
To avoid revealing classified info about the base operations and aircraft, they invoked the state secrets privilege, basically saying, we can't talk about this without harming national security.
and that worked.
Well, President Clinton actually issued a formal presidential determination. It specifically exempted the Air Force's operating location near Groom Lake, Nevada, from certain environmental disclosure laws.
So the president stepped in.
Yes, and that effectively stopped the lawsuit because the plaintiffs couldn't get the evidence they needed without classified info being revealed. Interestingly, that presidential determination has to be renewed annually, and it's still one of the few high-level formal acknowledgments that Groom Lake isn't just some ordinary part of Nellis Air Force Base.
Have there been other acknowledgments, sort of drips and drabs?
A few. The Air Force officially acknowledged the site's existence in '98 in response to a Freedom of Information Act request, but gave no details. Then in 2013, a big one. The CIA declassified a history of the U-2 and AX-CARP programs.
And that mentioned Area 51.
Heavily. Detailed its crucial role. The media jumped on it, calling it the first official acknowledgement, but really it was the first official declassification of specific activities there. A subtle difference, but important.
And didn't it pop up in pilot databases once? Homey Airport?
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah.
2007, suddenly Homey Airport, code KXTA, appears in Jeppson navigation databases that pilots use globally. Most people suspect it was just an accidental release of classified data.
Whoops. So how is security now? It's still intense.
Oh yeah, very robust. The perimeter's marked with orange posts patrolled by security people, call them the camo dudes.
Yampo dudes.
Yeah, because of their camouflage uniforms. The signs are pretty stark. Use of deadly force authorized. They've got motion sensors, cameras, round-the-clock surveillance.
And Janet Airlines still flies.
Still going strong. Those unmarked Boeing 737s flying personnel in and out, mostly from the airport in Las Vegas. Keeps everything very discreet.
Even little things could cause a stir, right? Like the Skylab photo.
That's a great example. 1974, astronauts on Skylab accidentally snapped a picture of Groom Lake from orbit. Seems harmless now, maybe, but it apparently sparked a whole internal debate about whether to classify the photo, even though the Soviets probably already had satellite images anyway. Shows the level of secrecy.
And there was that tragic shooting incident more recently.
Yes, in 2019. A man tried to drive through a security checkpoint near the base and was fatally shot by security personnel. It really underscores how serious they are about keeping people out.
Okay, we have to talk about it, the conspiracies. No deep dive on Area 51 is complete without touching on, well, the aliens.
Right. It's almost impossible to separate the place from the folklore now. The intense, decades-long secrecy just made it this perfect magnet for UFO stories and elaborate alien theories.
And the theories run the gamut, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Everything from storing crashed alien ships, Roswell connections, and studying extraterrestrial bodies.
Reverse engineering alien tech.
Secret meetings with aliens, developing exotic weapons based on their technology. You name it, someone's probably theorized it happens at Area 51.
And the stories about the base itself, massive underground facilities.
Miles and miles underground, supposedly. Transcontinental tunnels, even a disappearing runway on the lake bed that only shows up when you spray water on it.
Okay, that's getting pretty out there. But some of the early UFO sightings might have actually been Area 51 related, right?
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Think about it, those U-2 and IX-CART flights in the late 50s and 60s, flying incredibly high, incredibly fast for the time, unusual shapes, reflecting sunlight in weird ways. People saw things they couldn't explain. It's easy to see how those sightings could fuel the UFO idea.
And then you have figures like Bob Lazar.
Right. Lazar came forward in 1989, claiming he'd worked at a secret facility near Groom Lake, down by Papoose Lake. He called it Sector 4, or S4.
And he claimed he worked on alien spacecraft there.
That was his claim, reverse engineering alien propulsion systems. His story became absolutely central to a lot of the Area 51 mythology, but it's crucial to say his claims have never really been backed up by solid, verifiable evidence.
And then more recently, the whole Storm Area 51 thing.
Huh. Yeah, summer 2019. Started as a joke on Facebook, right? They can't stop all of us, but it just exploded, captured global attention.
Did loads of people actually show up?
Not millions, thankfully. Just a relatively small crowd turned up in the desert. But the whole event just highlighted how deeply Area 51 is embedded in the public mind as the place for alien secrets.
So when you strip away the sci-fi, what's the real story we're left with?
Ultimately, it's a story rooted in, well, very human ambition and Cold War necessity, pushing the absolute limits of aviation and aerospace tech.
Starting with the U-2.
Right. Crucial U-2 testing. Then indispensable for developing truly groundbreaking planes like the A-12, its successor, the SR-71, and, of course, the F-117 stealth fighter.
And don't forget the captured Soviet tech evaluation.
Absolutely. That vital secret work understanding the adversary. The intense security, while it definitely fed the mystery and the conspiracies, it was necessary to protect extremely sensitive, strategically vital projects.
So yeah, the popular image might be hidden alien ships, but the documented history is actually there's a really compelling tale of ingenuity, national security secrecy, and how aerospace tech evolved.
Exactly. A fascinating story in its own right.
Which leaves us with something interesting for you, the listener, to think about. Considering how decades of secrecy around Area 51 shaped both technology and, well, the public imagination, what other hidden places or projects might be out there right now?
Yeah, places holding equally fascinating, maybe less sensational, but still important stories. Where else is that tricky balance between national security and the public's right to know playing out today? Maybe in ways we don't even suspect. Definitely something to mull over.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey to the very top of the African continent, to the majestic Mount Kilimanjaro, the roof of Africa.
Exactly. We've really dug into Kilimanjaro for you, mostly using the Wikipedia entry, trying to pull out the most fascinating bits about this iconic mountain.
Yeah, our goal is to really get a handle on what makes Kilimanjaro so special. We're talking its fiery origins, the human stories tied to it, that whole situation with its shrinking glaciers and why climbers are so drawn to it.
Right. We'll filter through all the info to give you a clear picture.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning. The name, Kilimanjaro. What's the story there? It sounds significant.
It does, doesn't it?
Right.
But interestingly, the Taga people, who've lived on its slopes for ages, they don't actually have one single name for the whole thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they see the peaks separately. There's Kipu, or Kivo, that's the highest one, meaning spotted, because of the snow.
Ah, spotted. Okay.
And then Kimawensi for Mwensi, which means broken top. Pretty descriptive when you see Mwensi's jagged profile.
So broken top. I like that. So if the local name wasn't Kilimanjaro, where did that come from? It sounds Swahili to me.
That's the leading theory. It probably came from travelers, maybe Swahili speakers or early explorers interacting with them.
Okay.
One idea is that maybe explorers misunderstood a Chaga phrase, something about it being unclimbable, like Kilimanjaro.
Possible, I guess.
But more likely it's Swahili. Kilima means hill, or it's like a smaller version of Lima, which is mountain.
Right.
And Jaro,
Yeah.
well, that's the tricky part. It could mean greatness. Or maybe caravans, thinking about the trade routes below. Or even whiteness, referring to the snow. Mountain of greatness seems to fit, doesn't it?
It really does. It's amazing how much history can be packed into just a name. You mentioned early mentions. Did the ancient Greeks or Romans know about it?
It's scandalizing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ptolemy, back in the 2nd century AD, wrote about a moon mountain near the Nile source. Kilimanjaro is a possibility, though maybe Mount Kenya or the Rwenzori too.
The Moon Mountain.
Yeah. And even earlier, Aeschylus and Herodotus mentioned snow-feeding Egypt, or a spring between two peaks with fire traces. Again, it kind of fits Keely's profile, but it's speculative.
Whispers from the past. Is there anything more solid, historically speaking?
We'll jump forward to 1519. A Spanish writer, Martin Fernandez de Enciso, He heard from traders in Mombasa about an Ethiopian Mount Olympus west of the city.
Oh, okay.
And beyond that, the Mountains of the Moon, where the Nile supposedly started. Geographically, that points pretty strongly towards Kilimanjaro making its way into, wider awareness.
Right, becoming less of a myth and more of a known place. Fascinating. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts, the geology. What exactly is Kilimanjaro?
It's a stratovolcano, a huge one, built up layer by layer over, well, more than 2 million years. Think lava flows, ash, rock, all piled up.
Wow.
It's part of that whole East African rift system where the continent is literally pulling apart, creating these massive volcanoes.
And it's not just one peak, is it? I remember seeing pictures. There are three main parts.
Exactly right. It's a complex structure with three distinct volcanic cones. You've got Kibo, the highest and youngest, technically dormant.
Dormant, not extinct.
Not extinct.
Yeah.
And there's Moenzi, the broken top one we mentioned, which is extinct and heavily eroded. And Shira, the oldest, also extinct.
Okay, three cones. And how does it stack up size-wise globally?
Right, it's a giant. Highest mountain in Africa, no question. But what's really unique is that it's the highest freestanding mountain in the world.
Freestanding, meaning it doesn't belong to a big range like the Himalayas.
Precisely. It just rises straight up from the surrounding plains. It hits 5,895 meters. That's 19,341 feet. And its prominence, basically how much it sticks out from the land around it, is the same, 5,895 meters.
Incredible.
That makes it the fourth most prominent peak on Earth. Oh, and the highest volcano in the Eastern Hemisphere, too. It collects superlatives.
It really does. Those numbers are hard to wrap your head around. So tell me more about the history of these three cones. When did they erupt?
Shira was the first one active, starting maybe 2.5 million years ago, ending around 1.9 million years ago.
Say the oldest.
Then Moenzi and Kibo kicked off about 1 million years ago. Moenzi probably stopped erupting maybe 450,000 years ago. Kibo's last major phase was between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago.
Still pretty recent, geologically speaking.
Relatively, yes. And that phase created the summit crater we see now. But like I said, Kibo's not totally dead. It still has fumaroles inside the crater, releasing volcanic gases.
Fumaroles. So it's still letting off steam.
A little bit, yeah. A reminder of the heat still down there. And the summit itself is dramatic, isn't it? That huge caldera about 2.5 kilometers across.
Yeah, it looks massive in photos.
That formed when the summit collapsed inwards after a huge eruption. Inside that, you've got the inner cone and the Roche crater. And even deeper, the ash pit.
So craters within craters.
Pretty much. And then about 100,000 years ago, part of the crater rim collapsed outwards. That created the Western Breach, a really steep, famous climbing route, and the Great Barranco Valley.
Wow. And I read something about smaller cones, too.
Oh, yeah. Over 250 parasitic cones dotting the flanks, especially around Kibo. Each one marks a smaller, separate eruption point. They spewed out all sorts of different lavas, picrobasalts, trachybasalts, fancy names for different volcanic rock types.
It really is like a giant geological textbook. Is there any local memory of eruptions?
There is. The Maasai have an oral tradition, a story about a village near Lake Chala on the eastern side being destroyed by an eruption from Kibo, possibly sometime in the 1800s.
A chilling reminder of its power.
Absolutely. And it's why bodies like the IUGS recognize it as a geological heritage site. They specifically mention it being the highest stratovolcano of the East African rift that maintains a glacier on its summit.
Ah, the glaciers, the famous snows of Kilimanjaro. Which brings us to a difficult topic, doesn't it? The shrinking ice.
Tragically, yes. It's only because Kilimanjaro is so incredibly high that it can hold ice so close to the equator, way above the normal snowline.
Yeah.
And the evidence shows it's had much more ice in the past. There were at least 5 big glacial periods over the last 500,000 years or so.
Yeah.
During the last ice age, the ice cap was huge, maybe 400 square kilometers, stretching way down the slopes.
400 square kilometers. That's enormous. What about more recently? How old is the ice that's still there?
Ice cores drilled from the northern ice field suggest the ice at the very bottom is about 11,700 years old.
Wow.
Though some other analyses point to parts being much younger, maybe only 800 years old. It suggests cycles of melting and reforming.
Okay. Complex history.
Definitely. When Europeans first documented it properly in the late 1880s, it was still pretty substantial, around 20 square kilometers, with actual glaciers flowing down. But then between about 1912 and 1953, those glaciers retreated really fast.
Oh, why then? Was it warming?
Mostly attributed to a climate shift, actually. A change that led to drier conditions, less snowfall perhaps.
Yeah.
The balance just tipped.
And that shrinking has just continued.
And accelerated, sadly. What's interesting, maybe counterintuitive, is that it's not just about rising air temperatures up there. A big factor seems to be decreasing humidity, less moisture in the air.
How does that work?
Drier air can basically suck moisture straight out of the ice that's sublimation, ice turning directly into water vapor. And also, direct sunlight hitting the vertical faces of the remaining ice cliffs is a major cause of melting.
So it's drying out and melting from the sun.
Essentially, yes. The stats pretty grim. Between 1912 and 2011, almost 85% of the ice cover vanished. Went from over 11 square kilometers down to less than 1.
Less than 1 square kilometer left.
That's the figure from 2011. And the projections are, well, they suggest it could all be gone by mid-century, maybe 2040, maybe 2060, somewhere in that range.
That's incredibly sad. Thinking about the iconic image, does losing the ice affect water supplies down below?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the scientific view is that the impact on the overall water budget for the region is actually, quote, negligible.
Really? Negligible?
Yeah. The real water towers are the mountain's forests, much lower down. They capture the rainfall, acting like sponges, and feed the streams and rivers. The glacier melt is a tiny fraction compared to that.
That's surprising but important context. Okay, let's shift focus to the human side again. The Chaga people you mentioned earlier. Tell us more about their connection.
Their history is deeply tied to those southern and eastern slopes. They had established Chaga kingdoms there for centuries, right up until 1963. The mountain is central to their culture, their stories.
Any examples?
Oh, sure. There's a legend about a man named Tone who angered the god Rua, causing a famine. Trying to escape, Tone stumbled and supposedly created Mwenzi and Kibo by accident.
Huh.
And other tales, like secret elephant graveyards full of ivory high on the mountain, or about a magical cow called Rayleigh. These stories really show how woven into the landscape their culture is.
Fantastic folklore. When did the outside world, particularly Europeans, start paying attention?
The first sort of official report was in 1848 by a German missionary, Johannes Rebmann. He saw what he thought was a beautiful white cloud on a distant mountain.
A cloud?
Yeah, but his guide told him it was cold. That led Rebmann to realize it must be snow, which, caused a stir back in Europe's snow near the equator.
I bet. That must have sparked some expeditions.
It did. Several attempts were made in the 19th century, but they all failed. The altitude, the weather, the lack of proper gear. It was incredibly tough.
But someone finally made it, right? The first ascent.
Yes. In 1889, the German geographer Hans Meyer and an Austrian climber Ludwig Purtscheller, they reached the highest point on Kibo.
Meyer and Purtscheller.
They named it Kaiser Wilhelm Spitze then. After Tanzania gained independence, it was renamed Uhuru Peak, Freedom Peak.
A much better name.
Absolutely. And, it's important to remember the African guides and porters. There's a story about one, Yohani Kinyalalawo, who lived to be incredibly old. Some suggest he might have actually reached the summit with Meyer and Purtscheller, or even before, but the records aren't clear.
Right, acknowledging their crucial role. Were women involved in early exploration, too?
Definitely. Gertrude Benham reached the crater rim of Kibo back in 1909, which was a big deal.
Impressive.
And the first woman confirmed to have reached the actual summit, Uhuru Peak, was Sheila MacDonald in 1927.
Good for her.
Even Mwenzi, the tougher peak, had its first ascent in 1912. The mountain even saw some action in World War I, the Battle of Kilimanjaro.
Really? A battle there?
A minor one, but yes. And later, Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's first president, used a powerful metaphor, lighting a candle on Kilimanjaro as a symbol of hope for Africa.
What a great image. Okay, let's talk about life on the mountain, besides the humans climbing it. Flora and fauna.
Well, big animals are pretty rare high up, as you'd expect. But the lower forests do have elephants, Cape buffaloes. Sometimes trekkers see them.
Elephants, wow.
Yeah. Also things like bushbucks, chameleons, dik-diks, dukers. Those are small antelopes. Mongooses, sunbirds, warthogs.
A surprising amount.
Even occasional zebras, leopards, hyenas, especially over on the Shira Plateau. And there are unique species, too. The Kilimanjaro shrew, a specific chameleon, found nowhere else.
Endemic species. Cool. And the plant life must change dramatically with altitude.
Oh, hugely. You go through distinct zones. Lower down, it's mostly cultivation now. Then you get remnants of savanna and those unique chaga home gardens that grow coffee mixed with native trees. Really interesting systems.
Agroforestry.
Exactly. Above that, montane forests, then cloud forests, slightly different types, on the wetter south side versus the drier north. Then you climb into the heath and moorland zone with hardy erica shrubs.
Right, like heather.
Sort of. And even higher, you find tough little plants like helichrysum, kind of like daisies, surviving up to maybe 4,500 meters. Pollen studies from craters actually show how this vegetation has changed over thousands of years with climate shifts.
A whole world mapping on its slopes. Are there efforts to protect all this?
Yes, Kilimanjaro National Park was set up in 1973. Basically, no permanent settlement or tree cutting allowed inside the park boundaries to conserve those ecosystems.
Good. And the climate itself is a big part of the story, influenced by the height and being on the equator.
Totally. You get these complex wind patterns, trade winds lower down, anti-trades higher up, and the mountain creates its own winds, daily upslope and downslope breezes.
Like the mountain breathing.
Kind of, yeah. And two main rainy seasons, with the south side getting much more rain. So you go from warm bushland at the bottom, through rainforest, up to cooler moorland, then into cold alpine desert, and finally the Arctic conditions on the summit.
Arctic. Near the equator.
Yep. Average summit temperatures around -7 Celsius, 19 Fahrenheit. But nighttime lows can hit -15, even -27 Celsius. That's seriously cold. And it can snow up there any day of the year.
Incredible contrasts. No wonder it's such a draw for adventurers. One of the 7 summits, right?
Absolutely. Huge goal for mountaineers. There are 7 main trekking routes up to Uhuru Peak.
7 routes.
Yep, offering different experiences, difficulty levels, scenery. But that massive prominence we talked about, it makes altitude sickness a really major risk. Acclimatization is key.
Gotta take it slow.
Definitely. Tourism is massive, a big revenue source for Tanzania's parks, and provides jobs for thousands of guides, porters, cooks. Though there are always discussions about fair wages and working conditions, which is important.
Right. What are the main routes people take?
You've got Lemosho, Masham. Those are popular scenic routes. Marangu is the oldest, sometimes called the Coca-Cola route because you can stay in huts. Rongai comes from the north side, usually drier. Shira, Umwe, they vary a lot in length and difficulty. Lemosho even has a western breach option for the very experienced.
And technical climbing.
Mostly on Mwenzi. It requires special permits and proper rock climbing skills. It's much more serious than trekking up Kibo.
Okay. And Kilimanjaro seems to inspire some amazing feats, doesn't it? Records and things.
Oh, constantly. Youngest climbers, oldest climbers. It captures the imagination. And speed records Carl Lagerlof's ascent and descent time is just mind-blowing.
How fast?
Under 6 hours, 45 minutes round trip. And Dominic Lux did it under 24 hours without oxygen. Just incredible endurance.
Unbelievable.
Plus really inspiring climbs for people with disabilities. And someone even did a wingsuit base jump off the summit.
You're kidding. A base jump.
Yep. Talk about extreme. But of course, safety is a huge concern. Altitude sickness is the main danger. AMS, APE, HACE. Serious stuff. Plus falls, rock slides.
Routes get closed sometimes.
Yeah, the Arrow Glacier route is closed, and the Western Breach has been closed periodically due to rockfall risk, especially after things like El Nino impact the ice and rock stability. And sadly, people do die on the mountain. There are statistics on mortality rates.
A sobering reminder of the risks. Finally, Kilimanjaro isn't just a mountain, is it? It looms large in culture.
It really does. Hemingway's The Snows of Kilimanjaro is probably the most famous example, with that mysterious leopard.
Right, the riddle of the leopard.
It's been called maybe the world's most literary mountain. Shows up in works by Dave Eggers, Andrei Gusev. Douglas Adams even had a character climb it in a rhino suit.
Yeah.
In a rhino suit.
And in music, Toto's Africa, obviously. Films, too, like that IMAX documentary, Kilimanjaro. To the Roof of Africa. Yeah. Even hints of it in the Lion King landscape. It just has this powerful symbolic resonance.
It truly does. So wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered its volcanic birth, the really poignant story of the disappearing ice, the deep human history with the Chaga people, its role in exploration and climbing, and its place in our global imagination.
Quite a journey. And it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? Considering how fast those glaciers are going and how many people are climbing it. What will Kilimanjaro even look like in 100 years? What's our responsibility towards this incredible place and all the stories it holds? We've only scratched the surface today, really. There's so much more to this magnificent mountain. Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're joining us today, the learner, because you're looking to get a real understanding of complex topics without feeling like you're drowning in information.
And that's exactly what we aim for.
Right. Today's mission, we're diving into the world of Ethereum.
That's right. You've shared excerpts from the Wikipedia page on Ethereum, and our goal here is to pull out the really crucial stuff, the interesting bits, make it understandable.
Yeah, exactly. We want you to finish this with a solid grasp of what Ethereum actually is and, why it's become such a big deal.
Mm-hmm. You'll get the key facts without the overload.
Forget sifting through endless pages. We'll structure it, make it insightful, maybe even surprise you a bit. So, let's kick things off. What exactly is Ethereum?
Okay, so at its heart, Ethereum is a decentralized blockchain.
Right, decentralized, meaning not run by one single entity.
Precisely. Think of it like a shared digital ledger, but it's spread across loads of computers, not just one bank or company. But what really makes Ethereum stand out is its smart contract functionality.
Smart contracts, I've heard that term. What are they really?
Well, think of them like digital vending machines, almost, or self-executing agreements. They automatically carry out the terms of a contract once certain conditions are met. No middleman needed.
Ah, okay. So it's a blockchain that doesn't just track who owns what, but can actually run programs based on agreements.
You got it. And it has its own money, too, its own cryptocurrency.
Which is Ether, right, ETH.
Exactly, Ether or ETH. And in the crypto world, it's huge, second only to Bitcoin in terms of market capitalization, basically, the total value.
Number 2. That's significant.
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to remember, the underlying Ethereum software itself is open source.
Meaning anyone can look at the code.
Yep, anyone can inspect it, use it, share it. That's a core principle.
Okay, that gives us the basics, but where did this all come from? What's the origin story?
Well, the story really starts back in 2013. There was this proposal by a programmer, Vitalik Buterin.
Vitalik Buterin. He's pretty central to this, isn't he?
Absolutely. He was involved with Bitcoin Magazine at the time, and what's interesting is he saw blockchain tech having potential way beyond just, digital money. He felt it needed something more flexible, a better language to build all sorts of applications.
So not just payments, he was thinking bigger picture.
Totally. He was imagining things like maybe managing stocks or property ownership potentially on a blockchain.
Wow, back in 2013.
Yeah. He actually worked briefly on a project called Colored Coins, which was exploring some of these ideas. But when he couldn't get consensus there on how to proceed, he just proposed a whole new platform.
His own platform.
Right. One with a more powerful programming language, something called Turing Complete. That basically means it could, in theory, compute anything computable. That was the spark for Ethereum.
And this idea actually took off.
It really did. Ethereum was officially announced in January 2014 at the North American Bitcoin Conference in Miami, actually. Yeah, and here's where it gets kind of cool. Buterin, Gavin Wood, Charles Hoskinson, Anthony DiOrio, who put in the initial seed money, they literally rented a house in Miami.
Like a shared house.
Yeah, just hashed out the whole concept. Joseph Lubin joined them soon after. Apparently, there was even a reporter there watching it all unfold. It's kind of amazing thinking about it now.
A brainstorming session in a rental house turns into this. That's wild.
It really is. Gives you a sense of those early days, doesn't it? Anyway, about 6 months later, the founders met up again, this time in Zug, Switzerland.
Switzerland, okay. Why there?
Well, that's where Buterin announced Ethereum would be run as a nonprofit foundation. That was a big decision.
A nonprofit structure.
Although, it's worth noting, that decision caused some friction. Charles Hoskinson actually left the project around then. He later went on to found Cardano.
Ah, right. So there were quite a few co-founders involved early on.
Definitely. It was a collaborative effort for sure.
And the name Ethereum.
Yeah.
Any story behind that?
Yeah, apparently Buterin was just browsing Wikipedia looking through a list of science fiction elements.
Seriously? Wikipedia?
Yep. He landed on Ethereum, like the sound and the connection to ether. That old idea of an invisible medium that light traveled through.
Right, the luminiferous ether.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He saw Ethereum as this kind of fundamental, maybe unseen layer that applications could be built on top of.
That's actually quite a fitting name. So how did it go from a sci-fi name to actual code?
Okay, so formal development kicked off in early 2014. It was handled by a Swiss company, Ethereum Switzerland GmbH, or S-Suisse for short.
That's Swiss, got it.
And Gavin Wood, who was the chief technology officer then, was absolutely key. He wrote what's called the Ethereum Yellow Paper.
The Yellow Paper, what's that?
It's basically the really deep technical specification. It lays out exactly how the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM, works. We'll definitely circle back to the EVM. It's super important.
Okay, the technical blueprint.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
At the same time, they set up the nonprofit Ethereum Foundation, also in Switzerland, and to get funding.
They needed money to build it, obviously.
Right, so they held an online crowd sale, This was summer 2014. People could buy Ether, the token, using Bitcoin.
So an early form of ICO, almost.
Kind of, yeah. And interestingly, even back then, amidst all the excitement, people were already raising concerns. Things like, security and whether it could actually handle lots of users, scalability questions.
So those issues were flagged right from the start.
They were definitely being discussed,
Yeah.
which maybe explains why the foundation did something quite smart.
Mm-hmm.
They funded several different independent teams to build the Ethereum software.
Oh, multiple versions?
Yeah, using different programming languages,
Yeah.
Python, C++, Guard. The idea was redundancy. If one version had a major bug, hopefully the others wouldn't. A sort of backup plan.
That makes sense. Thinking ahead. So when did the public actually get to use it?
Well, after about a year and a half of testing different versions internally, they launched a public beta called Olympic. Yeah. And they actually offered Ether rewards, like a bug bounty, for people who could stress test the network, find flaws, push its limits.
Ah, incentivizing people to break it. Clever.
Exactly. Then the official public launch, codenamed Frontier, happened on July 30th, 2015. That's when the first block, the Genesis block, was created.
The very beginning of the chain.
Yep. It contained thousands of transactions distributing that initial Ether bought in the crowd sale. And it set the block, reward the payment for creating new blocks at 5 ETH back then.
Okay, so it's launched. Smooth sailing from there.
Not quite. Not long after launch, Ethereum hit a really major bump in the road, something called the DAO.
The DAO, that sounds familiar. Decentralized Autonomous Organization.
That's the one. It was basically a set of smart contracts built on Ethereum, designed to act like a venture capital fund, but decentralized. And it raised a staggering amount of money in 2016, about $150 million in a crowd sale.
$150 million. Wow, that's huge. What happened?
Well, even before it launched, some security researchers had pointed out potential vulnerabilities in its code. And unfortunately, they were right. In June 2016, an attacker exploited one of those flaws.
Oh.
Yeah. They managed to drain about $50 million worth of the DAO's tokens into a sort of child DAO they controlled.
$50 million just siphoned off. A digital heist.
Pretty much. And it caused absolute chaos in the crypto world.
Yeah.
A massive debate erupted.
About what? What to do?
Exactly. The big question was, should the Ethereum developers intervene? Should they do what's called a hard fork?
A hard fork? Like changing the rules of the software?
Essentially, yes. A software update that would effectively roll back the blockchain to before the theft happened, basically rewriting history to return the stolen funds.
But isn't the whole point of blockchain that it's immutable? That you can't change the history?
That was precisely the argument. It was incredibly contentious. For many, changing the ledger, even to correct a theft, violated a fundamental principle.
So what did they decide?
Ultimately, the majority of the Ethereum community voted in favor of the hard fork. It went ahead, and the stolen funds were recovered.
Okay, so they fixed it, in a way.
They did.
Yeah.
But not everyone agreed with that decision. A smaller group believed the original chain, the one where the theft wasn't reversed, should continue.
And did it?
It did. That original unforked blockchain still exists today. It's now known as Ethereum Classic.
Wow, so that one event literally split the network in two.
Exactly. The DAO fork wasn't just about fixing a bug. It raised fundamental questions about governance, immutability, and who gets to decide in a supposedly decentralized system. A really pivotal moment.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, so after this major crisis and split, how did Ethereum, the main chain, move forward?
Well, despite that huge setback, development continued. And interest grew, actually. In March 2017, something called the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, or EEA, was formed.
Enterprise Ethereum. So businesses getting involved.
Precisely. It started as a collaboration between blockchain startups, researchers, and big established companies. Started with about 30 members.
Like who?
Well, founding members included Consensus, JP Morgan, Microsoft, and it grew fast. Within months, it had over 150 members, including MasterCard and others. Major players exploring how they could use Ethereum tech.
That's serious corporate interest. Is the EEA still around?
It is, yeah. In fact, they just announced new leadership this year, 2024. So it's still active, still relevant in the enterprise blockchain space.
Okay. Now, somewhere in my memory, there's something about digital cats causing chaos.
Ah, yes. You're thinking of CryptoKitties. Late 2017.
What was it?
Yeah, it was this blockchain game on Ethereum. You could collect and breed these unique digital cat artworks represented as NFTs, non-fungible tokens.
Digital cats as NFTs.
Exactly. And it just exploded in popularity, got mainstream media attention. At one point, it was the single biggest gas guzzler on the entire network, the smart contract using the most processing power.
So these digital cats literally clogged up the network.
Pretty much. Some of these kitties were selling for, serious money. But the surge in activity really hammered home that scalability issue we mentioned earlier.
Right. The network couldn't handle the traffic.
It struggled. The sheer volume of CryptoKitties transactions caused major congestion, high fees. It was a real stress test.
So too many cats broke the blockchain, almost.
Well, it definitely highlighted the limitations, but it also spurred innovation. Right around the same time, January 2018, the ERC 721 standard was finalized.
ERC 721.
That was the first official standard for non-fungible tokens on Ethereum. CryptoKitties kind of proved the concept, and ERC 721 provided the technical blueprint for others to create their own unique digital assets.
So the cat craze actually led to a foundational standard.
In a way, yes. It showed the demand and the potential. These standards, like ERC 721, seem simple, but they really unlock this whole wave of innovation around digital collectibles, art, gaming items, fundamentally changing how we think about owning things online. Paved the way for the multi-billion-dollar NFT market.
From digital cats to a revolution in digital ownership. Quite the leap. What else was happening around that time and afterwards?
Well, Ether itself just kept growing in value, solidifying its #2 spot behind Bitcoin. There were other developments, too. Some odd ones, like an Ethereum Foundation employee getting arrested in 2019 for apparently giving a talk in North Korea.
Really? Okay, that's different.
Yeah. But on a more mainstream note, in March 2021, Visa announced they'd start settling some transactions using stablecoins running on Ethereum.
Visa. Using Ethereum. That's big.
Huge validation.
Yeah.
And then the next month, April 2021, major financial players, JP Morgan, UBS, MasterCard, invested heavily in Consensus.
Consensus. They're a major Ethereum infrastructure company, right?
Exactly. So more signs of serious mainstream financial interest and adoption.
It sounds like things were really picking up speed.
Absolutely. The network itself was also evolving. In 2021, there were 2 important upgrades. Berlin and then London.
London. Wasn't that the one with the fee change?
That's right. London included a really significant proposal, EIP 1559. It changed how transaction fees worked.
How so?
It introduced a base fee for transactions, which is actually burn destroyed forever. And then users add a tip on top to incentivize validators. The idea was to make fees more predictable and also potentially make ETH deflationary over time, since some supply gets burned.
Burning ETH. Interesting economics. Any hiccups with these upgrades?
Well, there was actually a brief period in August 2021 where the blockchain temporarily split into 2 because some node operators hadn't updated their software correctly after an earlier upgrade.
So keeping everyone on the same page in a decentralized network is tricky.
It absolutely is. It requires constant coordination. But the biggest upgrade, the one everyone was talking about for years, was the merge.
The merge.
Right.
That was huge. September 2022.
September 15th, 2022, to be exact. It was actually a sequence of 3 updates, culminating in Ethereum switching its entire consensus mechanism.
From proof of work to proof of stake.
Exactly. Moving away from energy-intensive mining, where computers solve complex puzzles, to staking, where validators lock up ETH as collateral to secure the network.
This was the big environmental move, wasn't it? Cutting energy use.
That was the headline, yeah. The merge is estimated to have slashed Ethereum's energy consumption by something like 99%. A massive reduction.
99%.
Huge. Now, instead of miners, you have validators proposing and confirming blocks. It was a fundamental shift, not just technically, but economically and environmentally too. A sign of the network maturing.
Still, 99% is dramatic for Ethereum itself, but did it make a big dent globally?
That's a fair point. The overall impact on global energy use is debatable. Some argue the mining hardware just moved to mine other cryptocurrencies. But for Ethereum itself, it was a transformative change.
Definitely a landmark event for the network. Has development stopped since the merge?
Oh, not at all. Things keep moving. In March 2024, just recently, the Dengthen upgrade went live.
Denkin, what did that do?
A key part was something called EIP 4844, or proto-Deng sharding. Sounds complicated, I know.
Proto-Deng sharding, okay.
Basically, it introduced a new way to add data to blocks more cheaply, using these temporary data packets called blobs.
Blobs.
Yeah, blobs. The main beneficiaries are Layer 2 networks.
Layer 2s, those are the scaling solutions built on top of Ethereum, right? Like Polygon or Optimism.
Exactly. They process transactions off the main chain to reduce congestion, then post summaries back to Ethereum. Proto-danksharding makes it much, much cheaper for them to post that data back to the main chain.
Ah, so it helps Ethereum scale by making the layer 2s cheaper and more efficient?
Precisely. It's all about improving scalability and reducing costs, especially for users interacting via layer 2s.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next on the roadmap?
The next big one planned is called Pectra. It's expected sometime around mid-2025.
Pectra. What's in that?
It's actually a combination of two planned upgrades, Prog and Electra. A couple of key things are expected. One is EIP 7251, which will raise the maximum amount of ETH a single validator can stake. Currently, it's 32 ETH. This would allow up to 2048 ETH.
So allowing bigger staking pools, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. It simplifies things for large stakers.
Mm.
And another interesting one is EIP 7702, which aims to give regular user accounts the ability to temporarily act like smart contracts for certain functions, more flexibility for users.
Okay, so constant evolution. It's clearly not standing still. Now, let's maybe zoom in a bit on how it actually works under the hood. We mentioned the EVM, but the whole network, how is it structured?
Right. So Ethereum is a peer-to-peer network. Every computer participating, every node keeps its own copy of the entire Ethereum database.
The whole history.
The whole history and the current state. All account balances, all smart contract code and storage. When you send a transaction, it gets broadcast out to the network nodes.
And then what happens?
Eventually, validators bundle these transactions into a block. A new block gets proposed and added to the chain roughly every 12 seconds.
Every 12 seconds. That's fast.
Relatively, yeah. And each new block is cryptographically linked to the previous one, forming that immutable chain. Like pages in a ledger, each one sealed to the last.
And these nodes, what's their main job? Just storing the data.
Storing, yes, but also validating and propagating information. They talk to each other, sharing new blocks as they're created, and also sharing transactions that haven't been confirmed yet. Those sit in what's called the mempool.
The mempool, like a waiting room for transactions.
Exactly. And critically, any node can independently verify the entire state of Ethereum. You can start from block 0, the Genesis block, and just replay every single transaction in order, and you should arrive at the exact same current state as everyone else.
That sounds computationally intensive.
It can be, yeah, especially syncing from scratch. Now, since the merge with proof of stake, adding new blocks works differently. No more mining.
Right, staking. How does that work again?
Anyone with at least 32 ETH can choose to stake it, basically lock it up as collateral and run validator software.
So you put skin in the game.
Exactly. These validators are then chosen pseudo-randomly by the protocol to perform one of two main tasks. Either propose a new block full of transactions or attest to the validity of a block proposed by someone else.
Propose or attest, like vouching for it.
Pretty much. It's like they're saying, yep, this block looks good according to the rules.
And they get paid for doing this.
They do. Validators earn ETH rewards for successfully proposing valid blocks and for making timely and correct attestations. It incentivizes participation and good behavior.
What about bad behavior? Can they cheat?
Well, the system is designed to punish that. If a validator tries to propose conflicting blocks, or if they're offline too much and fail to attest, they can get slashed.
Slashed. Sounds painful.
It means a portion of their staked 32 ETH is forcibly taken away and burned. It's a strong financial disincentive against attacking the network or being negligent.
So rewards for honesty, penalties for dishonesty or laziness.
That's the core idea. And the network reaches consensus on which chain is the real one by following the chain that has the highest accumulated weight of attestations from the validators. The majority rules, basically.
Okay. And Ether, the currency, where does it fit into all this again, beyond just staking?
Ether is absolutely fundamental. It's the native currency, the lifeblood, really. It's used to reward those validators for their work proposing and attesting.
So new ETH is created as reward.
Yes.
Very well.
And every account on Ethereum has an ETH balance, though technically the balances are tracked in a tiny unit called Wei. One Ether is actually 10 to the power of 18 Wei.
A billion Wei.
Yeah, it allows for very fine-grained calculations. But crucially, ETH is also the only currency you can use to pay for transactions on the network, the gas fees we mentioned.
Right, gas.
Those fees have two parts now. The base fee, which gets burned.
Removed from circulation.
Yep. And the tip, or priority fee, which goes directly to the validator, who includes your transaction in their block. It's an incentive for them to pick your transaction over others, especially when the network's busy.
So you need ETH to do anything on Ethereum.
Pretty much. You can't send a transaction, interact with a smart contract, deploy code, Nothing. Without having some ETH to pay for the gas. It prevents spam and allocates the network's limited resources.
So just to be crystal clear, Ether is the currency, Ethereum is the platform.
Exactly. Don't confuse the fuel Ether with the Ethereum.
Got it. Now, you mentioned accounts before. You said there were two types.
That's right. You have user accounts, sometimes called externally owned accounts or EOAs, and then you have contract accounts.
What's the difference?
Both can hold ETH, send ETH, receive ETH, interact with other contracts, both have an address. The key difference is how they're controlled.
Okay.
An EOA, a user account, is controlled by a private key, like your bank account login, but cryptographic. Only the person with a private key can authorize transactions from that account.
So controlled by a human, usually.
Usually, yes. A contract account, on the other hand, doesn't have a private key like that. It's controlled by its code.
The smart contract code itself.
Exactly. Contract accounts have code associated with them, the compiled smart contract, and they have their own internal storage to keep track of data. When a transaction is sent to a contract account, its code automatically executes.
Ah, so they're like little autonomous programs living on the blockchain.
That's a great way to put it. EOAs initiate actions, contract accounts react based on their code.
And the addresses look the same for both.
They follow the same format, yeah. That 0x followed by 40 hexadecimal characters, numbers 09, and letters AF.
Where do these addresses come from?
For user accounts, EOAs, the address is derived from the account's public key, which itself comes from the private key using cryptography specifically, the last 20 bytes of a KEKAC 256 hash of the public key.
Okay, some crypto magic ensures uniqueness. What about contract addresses?
Contract addresses are determined differently. They're calculated based on the address of the account that created the contract and a counter of how many transactions that creating account has sent, called the nonce. It's deterministic, meaning if the same account creates a contract under the same conditions, it will always get the same address.
Yeah. Okay, unique identifiers for everyone and everything.
Okay.
Now let's loop back to the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine. You said it's the engine.
It really is. It's the environment where all the transaction processing and smart contract execution actually happens. Think of it as the shared computer that all the nodes on the network run.
A virtual computer running on thousands of real computers.
Exactly. Specifically a stack-based virtual machine, which refers to how it handles data internally during computations. And it has its own unique set of instructions, its own machine language or bytecode.
And you mentioned it's deterministic.
Absolutely crucial. Determinism means if you give the EVM the same input, the same transaction, and the same starting state, it will always produce the exact same output. No matter which node is running it, what hardware it's on, nothing.
Why is that so important?
Because that's how you get consensus. If different nodes got different results from running the same transaction, the whole system would fall apart. Everyone needs to agree on the outcome to maintain a single, consistent blockchain state.
Right. Consistency is key for trust.
Totally. The technical details are all in that yellow paper by Gavin Wood, and different teams have built implementations of the EVM specification in various languages: Go, Rust, Python, C++, May, Java.
So the EVM isn't one piece of software, but rather a standard that different software implements.
Precisely. As long as they follow the spec, they should all behave identically. It's like having multiple brands of calculators that all give you the same answer for 2 + 2. The EVM is this universal computation engine for the blockchain.
Okay, that makes the EVM's role much clearer. Now let's revisit gas fees. How do they actually work with the EVM?
Okay, so gas is the unit used to measure the computational effort required for any operation the EVM performs. Every single little step a smart contract takes, every calculation, every piece of data stored, it all has a specific gas cost.
Like pricing every single instruction?
Exactly. Simple things like adding 2 numbers cost very little gas. More complex things, like storing data permanently or executing intricate logic, cost much more gas.
And when I send a transaction...
You, the sender, have to specify 2 gas-related values. First, the gas limit. That's the absolute maximum amount of gas units you're willing to spend on this transaction.
At setting a budget.
Exactly. Second, you set the gas price, or technically now, a max fee per gas, which includes a max priority fee per gas, the tip. This is how much ETH you're willing to pay per unit of gas consumed.
Okay, budget and price per unit.
Right. Validators look at the tips offered and tend to prioritize transactions offering higher tips, especially when blocks are full. The base fee, part of your max fee, is set by the protocol itself and gets burned.
So higher tip potentially means faster confirmation.
Generally, yes. When you send the transaction, the maximum potential cost gas limit, max fee per gas, is deducted from your account up front.
Upfront. What if it doesn't use all the gas?
Good question. If the transaction completes successfully using less gas than your limit, the unused portion of the gas fee is refunded back to you. You only pay for the gas actually consumed, plus the tip on that consumed gas.
And what if it needs more gas than my limit?
Then the transaction fails. It runs out of gas mid-execution. All the changes it tried to make are reverted undone as if it never happened.
Ouch. So you lose the fee.
You lose the fee for the gas that was consumed up until the point it failed, but you don't pay for the full limit, and the state change doesn't happen. So setting an appropriate gas limit is important.
Definitely. And gas prices are usually quoted in gwei.
Yeah, gwei. It's short for gigawei. Remember, 1 ether is 1018 wei. 1 gwei is 109 wei, or 1 billionth of an ether. It just makes talking about typically small transaction fees easier than saying 0.0000000002 ether.
Right, gwei for gas. It's a complex system, but it seems essential for managing the network.
Absolutely. It prevents infinite loops in bad code, stops denial of service attacks, and ensures validators are compensated for the computational resources they provide. It's the economic mechanism that makes the EVM usable.
Okay, that makes sense. So, with this powerful EVM and gas system, what kind of things are people actually building on Ethereum? What are the applications?
Well, because the EVM is Turing complete, the range is potentially vast. Anything you can express as code, theoretically.
Like?
Well, the foundation is the smart contracts themselves. Developers write the logic in high-level languages. Solidity is the most popular, but there are others, like Viper.
Solidity. Heard of that one.
Right. They write the code, they compile it down into that EVM bytecode we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Then they deploy that bytecode to the Ethereum blockchain.
And once it's deployed?
It gets its own address, and it just sits there ready to execute its code whenever someone sends it a transaction. Often, developers will also publish the original Solidity source code for transparency.
So anyone can see how it works.
Ideally, yes. But that transparency is a double-edged sword if there's a bug.
Everyone can see the bug too, and you can't easily fix it once deployed, right? Like the DAO.
Exactly. Once code is on the blockchain, it's generally immutable. Fixing bugs often requires deploying a whole new contract and migrating users or data, which can be complex and risky. The DAO attack is the classic, painful example of that.
A big challenge. Okay, what about tokens? We hear about tokens on Ethereum all the time.
Yeah, tokens are a huge use case. Ethereum basically standardized how to create digital tokens on a blockchain. The most common standard is ERC-20.
ERC-20, that's for?
Fungible tokens. Fungible means each token is identical and interchangeable, like dollars in a bank account, or, well, ETH itself. ERC-20 defines a basic set of functions: how to transfer tokens, check balances, see the total supply, etc.
So it makes it easy for anyone to create their own basic cryptocurrency on Ethereum.
Pretty much. Thousands and thousands of projects launch their own ERC-20 tokens, often through those initial coin offerings, ICOs, especially back in 2017, 2018. It fueled a massive boom.
Okay, so ERC-20 for interchangeable tokens. What about unique ones, like the CryptoKitties?
Right, those are non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, where each token is unique and represents something specific. Collectibles, digital art, domain names, virtual land, concert tickets.
Things where individuality matters.
Exactly. The standard for that, which emerged partly because of CryptoKitties, is ERC 721. It defines how to create and manage unique, individually identifiable tokens.
ERC 721 for NFTs.
Yep. And there are other standards too, like ERC 1155, which is kind of a hybrid. It allows for both fungible and non-fungible tokens within the same contract, useful for things like game items where you might have stacks of identical potions, but also unique legendary swords.
Okay, so standards for different kinds of digital assets. That NFT space got pretty wild, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. While the idea isn't brand new, there was a project called Ethereum doing NFTs way back in October 2015, before the standard.
Before CryptoKitties isn't.
Yeah. But the market really exploded in 2021. We saw sales like that Beeple digital artwork fetching over $69 million at Christie's. Just staggering numbers.
Mind-blowing. Okay, beyond tokens and NFTs, what else? I hear DeFi constantly.
DeFi, decentralized finance. That's arguably one of the biggest and most disruptive application areas on Ethereum right now.
What is it? Fundamentally.
It's basically an attempt to rebuild traditional financial services, lending, borrowing, trading, insurance, derivatives, but using smart contracts on the blockchain, cutting out traditional middlemen like banks and brokers.
Finance without the banks.
That's the vision. Users typically interact with DeFi protocols using Web3 wallets like MetaMask directly from their browser.
And what can you do?
All sorts. You can lend out your crypto to earn interest, borrow crypto using other crypto as collateral, trade assets on decentralized exchanges, DEXs like Uniswap, provide liquidity to those exchanges to earn fees.
Uniswap, MakerD.
Yeah.
Those are big DeFi names, right?
Huge. MakerDAO lets you generate a stablecoin backed by crypto collateral. Uniswap pioneered the automated market maker model for DXs. The amount of value locked up in these DeFi protocols grew exponentially.
And you can even trade things that aren't native to Ethereum.
Yeah, through wrapping.
Yeah.
You can lock up Bitcoin, for instance, in a secure contract and get an equivalent ERC20 token, wrapped Bitcoin, WBTC, on Ethereum. Then you can use that WBTC in DeFi protocols. It brings assets from other chains into the Ethereum ecosystem.
Wow. So it's like building a whole parallel financial system on the blockchain.
That's exactly what it is. Open, transparent, programmable finance. Though, of course, it comes with its own risks: smart contract bugs, volatile assets, regulatory uncertainty.
Definitely not risk-free. Are traditional businesses using Ethereum beyond just investing or joining alliances like the EEA?
They are, increasingly. Many large companies have been experimenting, often using private or permissioned versions of Ethereum.
Private versions. Why?
Well, for business applications, they might want more control over who can participate, more privacy, maybe higher performance, tailored to their needs, without being on the public chain. Companies like Microsoft, IBM, JP Morgan Chase have all explored this.
So they take the core tech but run it in a more controlled environment.
Exactly. JP Morgan even developed its own platform called Quorum, which is an enterprise-focused version of Ethereum, and they use it for things like their JPM coin for interbank transfers. So yes, enterprise adoption is definitely happening, often in these permission forms.
Interesting. So public chain innovation and private chain adoption happening in parallel. Let's talk performance again. You mentioned scalability being a challenge. What are the actual numbers like?
It's a constant focus. As of early 2025, the theoretical maximum throughput, if every transaction was just a simple ETH transfer, might be somewhere around, say, 140-something transactions per second, TPS.
Okay, 140-ish, theoretically.
But in reality, because people are interacting with complex smart contracts, the average sustainable throughput is much lower. It's been hovering around 25 TPS, maybe a bit more sometimes, both before and after the merge.
25 transactions per second. How does that compare to, say, Visa?
Yeah, that's the common comparison. Visa processes thousands, potentially tens of thousands, of transactions per second. So you see the scale difference. Ethereum's base layer, on its own, isn't built for that kind of global throughput.
So how does it ever hope to scale?
That's where those Layer 2 solutions come in, the things Dinkin helps. Rollups like Optimism, Arbitrum, ZK Sync. They bundle up thousands of transactions off-chain, process them quickly and cheaply, and then just post a compressed summary or proofs back to the Ethereum chain. The idea is Ethereum provides the core security and decentralization, while Layer 2s provide the scale.
Ah, so the main chain becomes the settlement layer, the ultimate source of truth, while the heavy lifting happens on Layer 2.
That's the roadmap, yes. Using data structures like Merkle-Patricia trees helps manage this data efficiently. But base layer congestion, like we saw with CryptoKitties, is still possible. The future is likely multi-layered.
Okay, a layered approach to scaling. Finally, let's touch on the legal side. How is Ether viewed by regulators? Is it legal?
It's complicated, and it definitely varies by country. There's no single global consensus.
What about in the US, for example?
In the US, the picture is still developing, but there's been a growing trend, especially from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, to view Ether as a commodity.
A commodity like oil or gold, not a security, like a stock.
That seems to be the direction the CFTC leans, primarily because Ethereum is seen as sufficiently decentralized, not controlled by a single issuing entity like a company selling stock. If it's a commodity, the CFTC would have primary oversight. The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, might still argue parts of the ecosystem involve securities, though it's not fully settled.
Okay, so maybe a commodity. How is it treated legally? Otherwise, can you own it?
Generally, yes. In most places, Ether is considered intangible personal property. You can own it, transfer it, inherit it. In the U.S., recent updates to the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, even created a category for controllable electronic records, CERs, specifically designed to cover digital assets like cryptocurrencies, providing clearer rules for using them as collateral in commercial transactions.
So the legal plumbing is slowly being built to accommodate it.
Slowly but surely. But it's definitely a moving target. Regulation is trying hard to catch up with the technology.
It certainly seems like a fast-moving space. Well, we have definitely covered a huge amount of ground here, diving deep into Ethereum. If you had to boil it down, what are the absolute key takeaways for you, the learner?
I think we've seen how Ethereum grew from Buterin's visions for a world computer, a blockchain going beyond just money. We've hit the core tech. Smart contracts, enabling programmable agreements, the EVM as the execution engine.
Right, and the major milestones, too. The early days, the shock of the DAO, and the resulting split, the massive shift with the merge to proof of stake.
Exactly. And the constant evolution, like the recent Denkin upgrade focusing on Layer 2 scaling. Plus, the incredible explosion of applications built on top DeFi reshaping finance, NFTs changing digital ownership.
And even enterprises building their own versions. It really spans a wide range.
It does. And it's clear this isn't a finished product. With updates like Pector on the horizon, the ecosystem is constantly adapting and growing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly dynamic.
Which brings us to maybe a final thought for you to ponder. Given everything we've talked about, Ethereum's power, its potential, but also its complexities and challenges like scalability and regulation, what kind of future impact do you think it will truly have? On finance? Sure. But also on technology, on art, on how we even conceive of digital value and ownership in the coming years?
That's a big question.
It is. And there are no easy answers. But based on its journey so far, it's definitely a space that remains incredibly important to watch.